afternoon, and welcome to Reexamining Cloud-Only Strategies, weighing cloud versus on-prem solutions for health systems' evolving needs. A health systems CIO production sponsored by HealthLink Advisors. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. My name's Anthony Guerra. I'm the founder and editor-in-chief of Health Systems CIO, and I'll be your moderator today. We're looking forward to your participation. You can send in your questions or comments at any time in the Q&A box, and we'll take them later in the program. Just so you see how we're going to spend our time today, first we're going to go about 35 to 40 minutes with our main panel discussion featuring Chuck Podesta, CIO at Renown Health, Scott Smizer, CTO at Emory Healthcare, and Brian Cornell, VP with the advisory group at HealthLink Advisors. And then we will have our Q&A. So let's jump right in. This is an incredibly timely and interesting topic. We're going to have a great chat. So Chuck, let's start with you. Can you give us an overview of your organization and your role?
Sure. Thank you, Anthony. Thanks, everyone, for taking time out of your busy schedules. Hope you find this rewarding for your time. So I'm Chuck Podesta. I'm the CIO at Renown Health. I've been here about 3.5 years. I actually just realized this year, 2025, that's my 30th year as a CIO. Yeah. So I don't know whether to celebrate or cry. So it's a little bit of both. But anyway, Renown Health is we're the only integrated delivery network in Nevada. One of the only nonprofits as well. We serve Northern Nevada. We have a 3-hospital system. We just hit the 2 billion mark this past year, 2024. So we're growing. Large strategic plan. As you know, Reno area is really booming. A lot of people coming from California. We're looking at 17 to 20% growth in the next 5 years. So our strategic plan is to build more facilities, and so from an IT perspective, we're growing as well. We also have a close relationship with UNR, the medical school, and working on actually becoming an academic medical center at some point in the future, rolling out right now some residency programs, work closely with the research as well. We also have an insurance company called Hometown Health Insurance, about 90,000 subscribers. So we've got the whole gamut of healthcare in Northern Nevada here in the Reno area. So thank you, Anthony. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Excellent, Chuck. Thank you. Scott?
Yeah, absolutely. Good afternoon, everybody. Scott Smizer. I'm the Chief Innovation and Technology Officer with Emory Healthcare. So we just recently went through a convergence of our IT operations between university and healthcare. So we're a combined organization. My role, I've got responsibility for the technology stack, the innovation stack, any kind of cloud engineering technology that we're delivering. So Emory Healthcare is about 11 hospitals, 24,000 employees, 3,700 employed, non-employed physicians, about $7 billion in revenue. But we work very closely, obviously, with the researchers and the university side. And I would like to say we're the most comprehensive academic medical center in Georgia. So thanks for having me.
All right, Scott, I apologize for not adding innovation. That's they gave you innovation, or you had innovation?
I had innovation before. It's now in my title. So
okay.
It's good. It's good.
I'll get that updated, buddy. Thank you. Okay, Brian.
Yeah, thanks, Anthony, and thanks again for having me here. So yeah, it's a tough act to follow behind Chuck and Scott here. So I'm on the vendor side with HealthLink Advisors. We're one of the smaller but premier healthcare consulting groups that's out there. We do a wide array of services ranging from pure advisory to operational planning, implementation, clinical assessments, and implementations as well. Been around for about 8 years now, and we're top class rated at this time. We're expanding our services here. We're probably at around 50 to 60 FTEs full time, and our newest service line is Project Blackout Blueprint, which, as unfortunately I'm sure all of you are aware of, focuses on cyber planning and disaster recovery. So extended downtimes, operational planning, contingency planning around that. I run the digital advisory group. So we really focus in the advisory group on assessments and strategic planning activity.
All right. Very good, Brian. Thank you. This is a fun one. Chuck, was your suggested question. It's quite
Yeah.
blunt. So let's jump right in. Why are we talking about this, Chuck?
Yeah, so it's interesting, and we had this conversation. This hit me with CrowdStrike. If you remember that the day of the CrowdStrike, and we had Change Healthcare before that. Cloud-based types of providers and solutions, and the Change Healthcare was one thing. We're a customer of Change Healthcare, and they had an issue, and so we're affected. CrowdStrike was a very different one for me. We have no relationship with CrowdStrike whatsoever. We have a different managed service provider on the cyber side. And so, when I woke up that morning and saw the CrowdStrike thing, I'm like, oh, man, too bad. I feel bad for the people who have CrowdStrike. They're going to have a lot of issues. Then I come in and I realize our HR payroll vendor that's in the cloud uses CrowdStrike, and they're down. And we got to run payroll on Monday, and this is Friday. And I'm like, wait a minute, I have zero relationship with CrowdStrike, and I've got an issue, and I have zero control over how to fix it, because I've got to rely on UKG to work with. That's our HR payroll vendor, to work with CrowdStrike to get the system back up running so we can run payroll. I had no control, and you can imagine trying to explain this to people. You're the CIO, you're the CIO CTO, you're running the organization and you're sitting there saying, I have no idea when we're coming back up again, because I have no relationship with the company that's down, and we're 100% reliant on this company to get our HR payroll back up that works with this other company. So that got me thinking. I was like, I can't be like, we can't live like this. I can't do this. And I was like, I want my own data center. So I completely went the other way, and so, I'm not here to advocate any type of approach. I'm here just to get people to think before you just start moving everything into the cloud. You think it's cheaper? It's not. And there's benefits to the cloud, but there's also benefits to co-locating some of your stuff on-prem and do what we call a hybrid solution, and really look at your data and where your data should reside. Where should it reside? In a co-location data center where you have control over that data, you have control over where it goes, or in the cloud, which has benefits as well. But again, when you think about the cloud from a cost perspective, and it's not less expensive, especially with, I know we're going to get into AI and some things like that, but that takes a lot of cycles, and you don't have control over some of those costs. Now, time to market, yeah. If I'm a vendor for profit, I'm putting as much in the cloud as I can, because I can spin up stuff quickly. I can get product to market, but that's not us. So you got to be very careful as to what we do with the cloud and what we do with on-prem, and from a security standpoint, certainly. And I know Brian is all over that as well. So I'll stop there. That's why we're here.
All right. Well, Brian, you threw your name out, so let's get your thoughts
Yeah.
on what Chuck just said.
Yeah, no, I very much agree with Chuck's position there. I know jumping around here a bit, but just to give a very recent example, we just did an assessment and plan with a client around imaging, and they're on Sectra, right? So it's one of the leading edge ones. Anyone that's working in any of the imaging space right now is aware, right? Most of the mainstream imaging vendors are pushing cloud-based solutions. So the interesting thing here, we did the cost analysis, and as Chuck pointed out, it was actually cheaper for them to stay on site. And then getting into the cyber aspect of it, and this is a theme we're seeing with several of the leading vendors. When you do go to the cloud, you look at their indemnity, and we're like, hey guys, what about a cyber event? What liability do you have? And they wash their hands of it. We have had a couple deals almost break over that because the vendors refuse to take on cyber liability. So it's just one of many aspects I think Chunk is hinting to there, right? And that's, I think a lot of the vendors are realizing now, it's like, wow, we have a lot of liability here. We're putting all our eggs in one basket, and we need to find a way to subtly push that elsewhere. So very much agree.
All right, Scott, what are your thoughts on what you're hearing?
Where to begin? Where to begin? So, honestly, I mean, healthcare is a core competency in the technology office. I mean, I don't want to be necessarily in the data center business. It's an expensive business to be in. I agree with Chuck. I don't know if going to the cloud is going to be cheaper. And I think during this webinar, we'll talk about the FinOps aspect of cost control and cost mitigation. because it would get out of control. But one of the things that for our organization that we've had multiple hyperscalers before, and we will continue to do so, but we really reached capacity at our primary data center there in Atlanta. And going to the cloud, I agree it's going to have to be a hybrid model. You got to really think through what you're dispositioning. We're taking a stronger approach that we're going to disposition those assets that make sense to go to the cloud, for us to not have to keep up with the iron, as I say, in the data center, that I'm not constantly having to try to forecast what the business needs are. But yeah, a lot to talk about, but I feel like that hybrid model is going to be where a lot of people need to land. But I think the cost control is where the rubber hits the road, to be honest with you.
Just to add to Scott's point, it's a great point around, we might get pushback from the standpoint, and I got questions on it as well when we started down this hybrid approach around, geez, are we getting back in the data center business, right? And so what we're doing is we have managed services in support of the co-location. So it's not that we're going out and hiring a bunch of people that are on the books here. Right now, we've already had managed services in our for things that are in our core competency, like help desk, like desktop support, asset management, network, data center support. That's all managed services. So we're not getting in the data center business, but we are managing SLAs of people who are in the data center business. So you can have a little bit of both ways, yeah, without getting back into that data center business. So I totally agree.
All right, very good. Next question. How should health systems evaluate whether a cloud-only on-prem or hybrid model is best suited for their evolving needs? Could we imagine a scenario where for some organization, cloud-only or on-prem only is the way to go, or is it pretty much the consensus that a mix is what's in the cards? Brian?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I would stick with the hybrid approach regardless. We have some smaller clients that we would definitely push the majority of their services, right? Just they have limited capital, they have limited spendability to be able to recruit the correct resources in. So in those cases, right, it makes a lot of sense to go to more cloud-based solutions. Even then, though, I would bifurcate it, right? So don't put all your eggs in one basket. So if it's an Epic client, go with Epic hosting, don't go with Azure or AWS or something like that. If you have other workloads like ERP or whatever, right, you're going with Workday or Infor, go with one of their cloud-based solutions, and maybe keep some of things, say like imaging or something like that, you might keep on site. I think it takes a lot of diligence. And I think that's a little bit of what Chuck was hinting to earlier, as well as Scott, is right. It's not an easy solution. You have to look at the security aspects. You have to look at what are my inherent skills? What do I have intrinsically? And part of that too aligns into what the strategic plan or what the alignment between IT and the organization is in terms of what does the organization expect of IT. And that has some impact on your planning and where you put workloads. Obviously, the financials play a big aspect to that as well.
Yeah, that's a great point, Brian. On the if you talk about the EHR, I totally agree with you. You know, either host it with Epic, which is basically a private cloud co-location.
It's private, right?
Yeah, private co-location. They do a great job, or co-locate it as well. And you can see now you've got control of that EHR. You got control of that sensitive data. Now you can use AWS or Azure. From a business continuity perspective, they both have AWS is coming out with this thing called IRE, where you can have a read-only copy out there, and Amazon will, things like that you can go to when you need to in a disaster type situation to help with like ransomware attacks and things like that. That's perfectly fine. That to me is the best of both worlds. So there's a way to marry cloud and on-prem together and to get a bigger bang for the buck.
Scott?
And it's cheap too. The read-only, if you go to read-only in the cloud, it's so much less expensive than production in the cloud, right? Yeah.
Scott, your thoughts?
I think it's going to be a hybrid model is where everybody's going to land. Where that number is on the scale for each organization is going to vary. I mean, some organizations, I mean, Emory, for example, we may be 80% in the cloud, and it may be multiple hyperscalers and 20% on-prem.
Mhm.
It could be a different percent for other organizations. It could be 20% cloud, 80% on-prem. I think the difference fundamentally in some of the approaches, the financing of these expenses. If the organization is very CapEx friendly, then they're going to want to do on-prem because you can capitalize and depreciate those assets. If the organization is not well capitalized, then that's an OpEx model where cloud is more favorable because it's just an operating expense. So as I've talked to other peers in other organizations, it depends on what model they like of where they're driving it. But for me, for the cloud in particular, it's just the scalability of me being able to react to. And I know we're going to get into some of the discussions around high computing clusters and stuff like that, where it may not make sense to go cloud. It may make more sense to stay on-prem, but I think it's going to land in a hybrid model. I don't know of any organization in my circle of peers that are all cloud or all on-prem. I think everybody I talk to is in a hybrid model today.
All right, very good. What are the most significant factors driving up cloud costs for health systems, and how can organizations proactively mitigate these expenses while still leveraging cloud capabilities? Scott, let's stick with you on this.
Yeah. So I'll just say first and foremost is FinOps. And, we've been doing stuff with AWS for quite a number of years. We're doing stuff now with Azure. And so part of what we're doing is really fine tuning the FinOps aspect of our cloud expenses. Me being an academic medical center, we've got researchers that want the ability to stand up an environment in the cloud, and there's a cost associated to that. So how we're accounting for whether we're charging back to a cost center or a researcher, et cetera, whether we're accounting for those costs back to them or we're absorbing those within my operating budget, accounting for service-based delivery of systems, how much does it cost me to do PACS in the cloud versus on-prem? That compute and storage calculation and the FinOps aspect. And I would recommend organizations really think this through, because that's where it gets sideways, in my opinion, is that if you don't have tight process controls around who can spin up assets in the cloud and who conversely turns them back off, the bill will come. Whether you wanted all of that gear spun up, it makes it very convenient and very lucrative to be able to dial up the horsepower in an organization, but the bill will come. And then, I think the other factors organizations could do is what I try to token is like cloudify different platforms and different systems or services you put in the cloud, thinking through what my needs are for 11 hospitals on a Monday morning when I'm running 300 clinics and surgery centers and all operations and diagnostics. That's a whole different demand on assets in the cloud versus a Saturday afternoon at 10 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So how do you dial up and dial down some of the demand needs to control costs? But I think checks and balances, first and foremost, in the FinOps aspirations of cloud need to be forethought. Everybody I talked to jumped into the cloud thinking that they were going to save money. You're not necessarily going to save money going to the cloud. At best, you'll probably wash that cost if you're good at it. But they did not think through how they were going to account for the compute and storage aspects of this stuff. So
Brilliant stuff there. Chuck, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, governance, and Scott is touching on that. You got to have strong governance around the cloud. And, if you've got Microsoft or AWS meeting with your analytics team on a regular basis, for example, and, somebody in the analytics team says, well, we need to do this and this. And Microsoft will be like, oh, we'll have that to you tomorrow. Well, there's a cost associated with that, spinning that up for tomorrow. And so unless you have strong governance, all of a sudden, and what we're really talking about is just the data, the exponential growth of data, and where does that data reside, and how's it being used is where the cost is going to be. So if we let's take the research approach that Scott just mentioned, with researchers, the cloud is going to be much more flexible to them, but but you can also control where the data is coming from, because a lot of the data that the researchers are using are, say, from the EHR, right? Well, if you have your EHR in the data center, co-located, you've got control of that data, but then you move the data to the cloud that they need through some sort of honest broker portal where they can generate their own cohorts in the cloud and manipulate in the cloud, but your base data is still in the data center. So there's a nice hybrid approach where you're only moving the data to the cloud that you need to use, and you get charged for that, as opposed to everything in the cloud and getting charged for all of that and all the time. So that would be one example I think would work well. Yeah.
Brian?
Yeah, so Chuck and Scott kind of hit the right. What can the organizations do? What are best practices around that? And they talked about, the governance aspect of that, right? And FinOps, which is really gaining a lot of momentum there. So I'll kind of look at the other side of the coin first here, right? Just looking at it sheer from the market perspective, why are the costs going up? And it's really just simply demand, right? And when you peel the demand onion there behind that, what's behind that is AI. Right. And again, what Scott and Chuck called out is everybody's going to the cloud, right? It's it started, it's funny just thinking, Chuck, of what you said, even it's so easy to spin something up in the cloud. I mean, I think even personally, right, you have Google or you have OneDrive, with your 365 subscription with Microsoft, right? And you're like, oh, I just ran out of space. Oh, another $5 a month, I get another, whatever, half terabyte or whatever storage. It's so easy. So that's where that governance and that oversight, it's almost like this is the new app rationalization, right? So we've been dealing with subscription-based apps for some time now, and there's a proliferation of those, and organizations try to pull that back in. But all of this conspires to just create a lot of demand. And again, I'll go back to AI, right? Spinning up AI workloads just consume massive, massive amounts of hardware. And behind that is the energy cost, right? To do that. And then on top of that, add in inflation. So those are some of the market drivers behind all that are just making it more expensive to begin with to do business in the cloud.
Mm-hmm. And if you look, Anthony, and what's happening, with some of the things that came out of the government just before it switched administrations around AI and data centers and where they need to be built, in the United States, and the power and that they need to run these data centers and AI. I mean, I had a consulting company tell me the other day that data centers are hot again. People, and they're building them for a reason. They're not building them. They've already done the market research. People want to put their data back into data centers for a reason. And so what we need to think about is why. Why is that happening? And how can we, how should we change our thinking to take advantage of those things? Because across all other industries, they're looking at hybrid approaches as well. And we're
Scott,
always late to the game. Yeah. Healthcare is always late to the game, right? Yeah.
Quick statistic out there. So a lot of the big data centers that are now being built are, from a power planning perspective, are looking at 500 megawatts. Yeah. That's the size of it. That's the power consumption of a mid-sized city in the US.
Exactly.
It's crazy.
I want to touch a little bit on the idea, and Chuck, we did a whole webinar on this a while back. The idea of CIOs having deep understanding of the financial aspects, the accounting aspects, and business management aspects. It seems like this is a perfect example of how those things can come together, where in the CIO, the CTO role, you have to deeply understand the technology, but you also have to deeply understand finance. And Scott, when you were talking about all the different ways these arrangements can be constructed and the pros and cons of OpEx versus CapEx, is there anything there you'd like to comment about the understanding needed to make good decisions here? And does this bleed into the importance of the relationship with the CFO?
No, I mean, absolutely. I think any good technologist that nowadays, I'm fortunate that my undergrad and grad are both in business, so I have that acumen to talk financial terms. But I mean, we are very closely tied with finance about just cost projections and understanding the appetite. And part of the reason why we need to be tied to that is just so that they can understand that there's a cost associated to these decisions. And there's an impact to, whether it's going to be capital or operating. But I think more importantly, what we've tried to do within Emory is I've tried to pivot we've changed to Emory Digital. And I've really tried to pivot with the other leaders that we're working with. Let's not be a cost center. Let's be a value center. And in doing the value, we've got to show value. But I mean, part of it is just you've got to stay focused with the cost of this, because it'll get sideways. I talk to so many people that get into the cloud and don't think about the finances of it, and then they can't get out of it quick enough or get it under control, and it becomes this 800-pound gorilla that they're trying to manage, that they used to feel like they could put a box around in a data center.
Brian, any thoughts on the financial management aspects of this in terms of making the ultimate decision? And, Scott made a great point, which we can get into, about getting out of this. Anytime and we have a question later on, we could touch on it now if you want, about orchestrating contracts. It's sort of whenever as we're getting into something, we always assume and hope it's going to work out, but sometimes they don't. So how do we protect ourselves?
Sure. Yeah. Very much agree with Scott. So anytime we're brought in to do work, whether it's a selection or if we're doing any kind of planning, typically that involves, right, some cost analysis. We typically do a 10-year cost model, and we try to look at all aspects. So we look at, staffing, we look at all the contract requirements, we look at, any of the tangents to it. So other technologies that might be required, subscriptions. And then on the back end of that, right, so looking at, what are your term liabilities, exfiltration of data, repatriation, what are the costs associated with that? And then we also look at savings, right? So if you're replacing systems, we'll also look at what are you able to sunset, what are the costs to sunset, where does that data go? So that may have a cloud aspect to it as well.
Chuck, anything you want to add there?
Yeah, I mean, if you're an IT leader and you don't understand EBITDA, you need to go back to school. I mean, you have to understand that. That's what drives EBITDA, is what drives an organization. Everything rolls into EBITDA. And I actually, when I do all hands, I do our monthly and year-to-date finances, not just from IT, but from the whole organization. And I end with EBITDA and where we are, because that's your future, that's your savings account. So and the close relationship with the CFO is absolutely, it's the first person, when I go into an organization, it's the first person I meet with from a senior leadership perspective, and start developing that relationship, from day one. Critical to getting this stuff done. And, when these costs get out of control, this is OpEx on the cloud side. This is bottom line stuff. This is, EBITDA, this is bottom line. Where if you can get some of the things in a hybrid in a CapEx model in some way, yes, you've got to use CapEx, but that's depreciated over many, many years, much less of a hit to EBITDA. And so again, it's a balance, but you've got to have some understanding and be able to maybe not talk on equal terms with the CFO, but have an understanding of where they're coming from as well.
Chuck, could the CFO be sort of laying out the framework that you have to work within and saying, we want more in OpEx or we want more in CapEx, and telling you,
Totally.
your proposal is not taking us in the direction that we want to take the organization financially. So here's the parameters I need you to work within. Here's the balance, 80-20, whatever it is. Could it be like that?
Yeah, absolutely. And Scott touched on it. Some organizations are CapEx focused and some are OpEx, and depending on where they are, and the CFO knows that. The issue I have, we do everything with a 5-year ROI, and so to me, it's very difficult with a cloud-based solution to do a 5-year ROI, even adjusting for or trying to identify what the costs are in 3, 4, and 5 because of what we've been talking about here. And you get yourself in trouble when you get to year you get to year 2 and year 3 and you're not following the ROI. I mean, you're exponentially above the spend rate. That's hitting the bottom line. Now everybody's focused on you, IT, because you used to be, 4% of total operating revenue of the organization. Now you're at 5 and you're heading to 6. And so what are you going to do about that? Well, there's not a lot you can do about it because you're already contractually committed. The data's there. You've spun up the cycles. Turning back is going to be very difficult. And I'll get back to what Scott said. You better be able to show value of going from 4 to 5 to 6%, the value to the organization. Otherwise, you're dusting off your resume, I guess.
Yeah, real quick, just jump on Chuck's last comment there. It's easy to pivot to the cloud. It's much harder to pivot away when you get in that situation.
Scott, I think you
And-
want to jump in there.
Yeah, to add to what Chuck's saying, I mean, when you go into the cloud, you're going to get into potential multi-year large contracts to get the volume pricing. It's going to be based on projections of compute and storage. So when you sign that contract in that 5-year relationship, you're on the hook for whatever that compute and storage was. So if you under forecast it, then you're going to be renegotiating year 3. If you got it way off, guess what? You're still on the hook for the full commitment of that contract years 4 and 5, whether you're using it in the cloud or not. So you've got to be careful about architecting those kind of deals. But you also need to know what is the exit and glide path out of any relation, whether it's cloud or any vendor, really. I mean, any good contract negotiation, you always want to have the end in mind, like, well, what if this marriage doesn't work and we get divorced? What do we do?
Yeah.
You got to think through that from the very beginning. But yeah, I mean, I hear of stories where people have signed long-term deals that they got the numbers way off and they're committed to that spend, whether they're going to use it or not.
All right, very good. Let's look at our next question. What role do compliance, privacy, and cybersecurity play in the decision-making process between cloud-only and on-prem solutions, especially for sensitive healthcare data? Brian, let's start with you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Anthony. Yeah, and I go back, I think, to one of my opening comments there. I think they play a pretty significant role here. We always include them, particularly, right, your CISO, your cybersecurity. I think they play a very big role in planning out, what you're going to put there, how you're going to handle authentication, what controls are in place, what layers based on the products that are being used. And it's a security assessment as well, right, of the cloud provider, their practices, looking at their SOC 2 report, things like that. And then following it through, even after, assuming everything goes well, right, it's actually doing testing afterwards, whether it's penetration testing or some other sorts of variations on invasive testing to make sure that their platform is solid. I think, as we've all seen, right, some of the more recent exploits aren't because of just a hole in security from a technical perspective. It's practices, right? There was earlier in 24 news circulating where a Microsoft employee had high-level credentials for Azure that were left floating and created a potentially large breach there. So it's looking at those aspects of practices as well.
Very good. Scott?
What role does compliance and privacy and cybersecurity play? For me, it's everything. I mean, I feel like I am lockstep, hooked at the hip with the CISO at Emory, that we're talking about this kind of stuff all the time. And I think more importantly, as we stood up our Azure landing zone and the foundation of that, I mean, the security team was at the forefront of building out that secure landing zone way before my team started dispositioning anything. So it was really their foundation to engineer with my team to make sure it was what we felt was appropriate and it was safe and compliant. So I feel like those folks that you're describing in that question need to be right there at the table with you from day one.
Chuck?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, your CISO is your partner in every step of the way and trying to define your hybrid strategy. But we can also learn from other industries as well. When you look at look at the Department of Defense, look at the stock market. Their critical data is not in Azure and AWS. It's just not. It's in co-location data centers across the country, and very secure ones. in data centers that we don't even know about because those vendors aren't allowed to talk about what vendors are in there or what their customers are in their data centers. So, you know, if they look at it that way with their data, I mean, with PHI and identity data, shouldn't we be doing the same thing before we all of a sudden say, hey, we're just going to, you know, move this application to the cloud with all this PHI? Think about what other industries are doing with their critical data. And I think there's a balance there, but your CISO is definitely your partner to help you make those decisions.
All right, very good. What considerations should IT leaders keep in mind regarding uptime, disaster recovery, and operational resilience when choosing between cloud and on-prem solutions? Chuck, let's stick with you.
Yeah, you know, I mentioned it earlier. I think there's a role for both. You know, if you have, you know, if you just think about the EHR, you know, and I think what you're seeing in the CISO world, at least when I talk to my CISO, there's kind of a shift now from, you know, preventative types of attacks and alerting and things like that. All very important. You still need to invest in that. A lot of great tools out there, to more of a resilience and business continuity approach. Because, you know, if you look out there and what's happened over the last couple of years, again, it's not if, it's when you're going to get, you know, a ransomware attack or something along those lines. And you can't be down for a month. You know, we've seen those stories, and you see how much that costs an organization, and for small organizations, basically could sink you as an organization. So you need to assume that it's going to happen to you at some point. So how do you come back from that quickly using some technologies? So is there a play? And I mentioned it earlier, between like an on-prem and for your EHR and a cloud-based solution that allows you to at least get up and running, where you're not shutting down your ORs in your emergency department and going on diversion and things like that for 30 days. You know, can you get that down to, you know, a week or 10 days or a day or 2 days? And I think you're seeing a big focus on that whole resilience side. I think you're going to see that more and more over the next couple of years, and just kind of, not that you're going to stop the attacks, but just say, look, it's going to happen. We've done the best we can. We built the highest defense possible for the organization, but somebody's going to leap over it at some point. And now we got to focus on, let's get back up and running as quickly as possible. And I think this hybrid approach really plays well in that.
Scott?
You know, I think top of mind when you're doing this stuff, it's really building redundancies, redundant express routes, the multi-region approach to your hyperscaler, whether it be Azure, AWS, et cetera. So building all the redundancy in it. But I think part of the resilience aspect of this is figuring out what applications you're going to put in tier 0, tier 1, 2, 3, because there's a cost associated to that. If you're putting them in a tier 1 where they're automatically redundant in multi-regions, there's no downtime, right? But there's a cost associated to that. What I've ran into is we've kind of looked at dispositioning different waves of applications out of the data center. Everybody feels like their application should be a tier 1 application. It's just like when you're doing archiving and decom. How much data do you want, Brian? I want all my data since 1863, right? Well, there's a cost associated to that. So, you know, we're really navigating through like, well, what are mission critical, like to keep the lights on, keep the doors open in our facilities? What is needed for us to operate and serve the communities that we're working in? So I think top of mind needs to be redundancy all around, but you've got to be diligent in looking at what you're putting in different tiers of redundancy, because again, there's going to be cost associated to that.
Perfect. Brian?
Yeah, I'd say maybe in a slightly different way what both Scott and Chuck were saying there. To me, this is foundational, right? As you develop your cloud strategy, this needs to be something that's always front and center in your design objectives for your strategy, right? So what I mean by that is, what do you want to put there, and what level of resiliency or redundancy do you need based on what you want to put there, and what are the associated costs with that? So there's a little bit of chicken and egg that goes there, but I think it's really important to consider this upfront while you're designing your strategy or solution, and not as an afterthought and say, oh yeah, we need to add this or that in. That's where some of your cost escalators come in. And again, it creates a security, it changes your security profile for the worse there as well. One thing, and just to add on, we're starting to see some clients do in general, not just around cloud strategy, but just around disaster recovery more broadly, is they're actually bringing their cybersecurity insurer to the table. And that's actually very enlightening because you get a very, very different perspective. When you think about it, they know best, right? They're dealing with the liability and the payouts and claims associated with that all the time. And based on their, their postmortems and all, they have really good insights there. So I'd throw that out there. We've seen that a few times, but I do see that as a growing trend there. It can be very valuable.
Yeah, it's a great point, Brian, because we renegotiated last year for cyber insurance. We were able to up our deductible and actually save, I think it was a 13% discount, and it was all based on our cyber program and what we had in place, but also what our 3-year roadmap was. You got to bring them in, because once they see that and they see what you're doing, you can save a ton of money there.
That's a really good point, Chuck. Yeah, and that we've seen even some clients will afterwards, like as part of their DR drills, actually bring them on site, let them observe.
Exactly.
Great feedback, and another way to achieve some premium reduction.
Yeah, totally agree.
Scott, quick follow-up for you. You mentioned about dispositioning applications in the proper tier, balancing costs with the importance of the application risk. Is there a governance process that could come into play for ultimately making the decision on those apps? As you said, everybody's going to think theirs is tier, this is the most important, needs the highest level of security. And then, so is there a process for I guess a lot of people getting input and ultimately a decision being made? And then is there a process for that getting reviewed over time? You can imagine what might be determined the most important things today may not be the same 3 years from now.
No, I think it's a fair question. What I've done at Emory is let the governance and the project team play that out, and then I'm going to bubble that up to the executives to sign off that we're all agreeing that, and part of that is educating my peer group and executives within the organization about what is a tier 0, tier 1, what are you talking about, Scott? You're speaking foreign languages to me. So it's educating them, but then bringing that data before them to say, are we all in agreement that this is our resiliency, our business continuity plan with cloud operations? But to your point, Anthony, I think that needs to be reviewed at least on an annual basis, because things change. Vendors that were not cloud-based are cloud-based now. And, I think that needs to be reviewed and analyzed, at least cursory analyzation of it, at least annually.
All right, very good. We're going to go with my favorite segment here, the Ask a Co-Panelist. Brian, I'm going to give you an opportunity first. Do you have a question for one or both of your co-panelists?
Oh, wow. I was expecting you to throw it at Chuck. I know he was. So, yeah, that's a good one. I think it's been good discussion today. So in terms of, yeah, I guess my question would be, what workloads are, I guess, Chuck, I'll start with you, but certainly Scott, what workloads are you pushing into the cloud? And what I mean by that, are they packaged workloads? Like, in other words, right, it's like Infor, your ERP system, or an Epic where it's just, private hosted, or are they more based on like custom workloads, things that might be AI driven, right? So you have a high performance compute, you don't have the capacity there. So I'm just curious, what kind of workloads?
Yeah, I mean, for us, right now, I'll just use the example of like an ERP solution. Anything new that we bring in, I would say it's probably 90% that it's going to be a cloud type of solution, because we're not bringing in an imaging, platform or a new EHR or something like that, where you're really sitting back and saying, okay, data center versus a cloud. When you do something like a Workday from an ERP, and we're actually doing an analysis around that. We have a very kind of old best of breed ERP all jumbled together, and we need to move that out. Now, a lot of these work like a Workday type of ERP, the cloud-based makes a lot of sense because of the AI components to it. From a data analytics, you can really do a lot with that. And again, it's Workday managing the cloud. It's not Azure. It's not Microsoft doing that. It's not AWS. It's Workday. So from a contractual perspective, you can get some controls around, the growth and things like that, as opposed to, spinning up with research and things like that with AWS. So I feel more comfortable going to the cloud when you have a vendor kind of in between you and Microsoft and AWS and Google and all those other players. So yeah.
Scott, anything you want to add there?
For me, I think it's a combination of both. I mean, the typical workloads, dispositioning, EHR, ERPs, et cetera, dispositioning those workloads into the cloud. But I think us being a research and academic medical center, I mean, we've got high performance compute clusters that are used on-prem that we know that it's just going to be cheaper to do that on-prem. We already know. But what we're dealing with the evolution of AI, as we dabble into some of the AI stuff within the cloud, we're starting to see, that may not be the most cost-effective way to do some of this. So again, I can't stress enough the FinOps aspect of your cloud strategy. You've got to be mindful of, it's like the electric bill at the house. You got to be mindful that you're leaving the lights on when you're in bed. So you got to be mindful of what you're doing, because it will, and I'll share some dirty laundry. We had some researchers not too long ago, it wasn't this holiday season, but it was the past holiday season, that we spun up some gear, and they were doing the research stuff and they didn't tell us to turn it off. Well, we came back after the holiday winter break, and guess what? The servers were still on, they weren't being used, but the bill came. So the researchers were like, well, we didn't do anything. I'm like, the cloud doesn't care. You had the nodes and the storage and all of that turned on. The light was on. Whether you realized it or not, the light was on. So it's educating people that are actually either funding or getting chargebacks. If you're doing chargebacks within your organization, educating them that if you're not using it, you're still going to get charged for it.
Scott, did you get to have make one of those fun calls to the vendor where you're like, yeah, do you really need to charge us this? We didn't really use it. It was a mistake. Like if
Yeah,
my kid
Anthony.
spends too much on Fortnite, maybe
Anthony, the next time I'm in one of those deals, I'm going to call you to let you call the vendor.
yeah.
He
We'll
really
do
didn't mean to.
absolutely we'll conference me in and I'll do the talking. I'll say, hey, come on guys.
I
What are
like
we
it.
doing here?
But
Excellent.
it's real world. I mean,
Yeah.
again, when you get those bills that, if you turned it on, you're paying for it, whether you're using it or not.
Oh boy. Yeah. But they're like, we're really smart researchers. Don't yell at us. And you're like, okay. That's very good stuff, Scott. Great story. Okay, Scott, do you have a question for one or both of your co-panelists?
Let's see, Chuck, a question for you. So is there anything that you dispositioned to the cloud that you're like, shouldn't have done that, should have left it on-prem? Having any regrets of stuff that you've moved to the cloud that you want to move back?
I'm not sure yet. It's too early to tell, but it's a great question. We moved our imaging to the cloud last summer. Okay, and it was actually before I had this whole hybrid thought process going. It was more of like, here's our vendor, our major vendor. We have it on-prem right now, imaging. These are our costs associated with it. We had a lot of growth coming. So we looked at it from that perspective. On-prem, it was going to be very expensive. And we had the cloud solution, which looked, with the same growth, actually looks like it would save us money. And so we're about 6 months into that, moving to the cloud. So far, so good. But we'll see. I may have to eat crow on that one. We'll see.
I'm not too far behind you. We're going to be dispositioning our PAX platform into the cloud as well. But I mean, when I look at just price per petabyte of storage alone.
That's the key. Yeah.
That's the thing, is that, I mean,
big.
these hyperscalers, whether it be Google, AWS, Azure, pick your poison, that, I mean, they can do things on scale that I can't.
Right.
So, I mean, when I look at the price per petabyte to store cold storage or hot storage, I can't do it at scale that they can. So that's the appealing part of this. And I mean, in
It is.
theory, as you kind of get into the cloud, in theory, as you get through contracts and renewals, compute and storage costs should go down and become more efficient in theory. So this will be interesting to see how some of these contracts, these long-term contracts play out.
Yeah.
Brian, I'd love to hear from you as you listen to this. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I'm fascinated here. I think imaging is an interesting area. We have a lot going on in the imaging space, as I'm sure you're both aware, right? It's a combination of hangover from right? The focus on ERPs and EHRs, and now everyone's like, oh yeah, PACS. And then there's the whole crisis with not enough radiologists and the workloads that they're dealing with here. We've seen a mix, and that's why I'm fascinated here. You both went to the cloud. I think with imaging, it's not different than anything else, but I think some things are amplified in terms of considerations, right? You have to look at where your radiologist located, how are reads being done. I think you really have to spend a lot of time with your vendor as you're going through that selection and the contracting process to understand, what is their model, if it's going to be in the cloud, prefetch, right? DICOM routers, placement of that, and where, right, in relation to where the modalities are and your radiologist. I think that's really critical to get right, because we have a very large client, a client that's national, that didn't get it right. And, we're now going through that course correction with them. So I think there's, it's interesting. I'm just curious there without knowing the details, but yeah, it's good.
All right, very good. We're almost out of time. I'm going to give everyone a chance for a final thought. And the way I want to sort of frame it up, a final piece of advice is this. I mean, obviously, what everyone's trying to do here is trying to balance things like sort of one of the main upsides here is of being in the cloud is being responsive to your customers, right? I mean, this is what we talked about, to the researchers and to the really smart folks that want to use AI and want to, we use the term spin things up and open up a sandbox and play and do cool stuff for patient care and all that kind of stuff. So they come to the technology department, you want to be able to say, yeah, sure, today, tomorrow, whatever, as opposed to, well, that's going to take a long time and I have to look into this and all. So it's responsiveness to customers. There could be an upside in terms of disaster recovery, business continuity. Although that, Chuck brought up the point of the CrowdStrike story and saying, well, there could be a lack of control or a loss of control. And certainly there's a cost issue here. And then we talked about different ways to manage that. And Chuck, you made another interesting point, which is, it's interesting. I don't think anybody loves dealing directly with these big hyperscalers, right? It's like there are companies that specialize in being in the middle and helping you work with them. And then there are sort of specific companies like Workday, Chuck, you mentioned, which is, yeah, I kind of like anybody in the middle. Like, I don't want to have to call Google, right? Because that's just not fun. So lots of stuff to balance here. It sounds like a big balancing act for the IT executive in question. Many things they're trying to balance. I'd like to get your best piece of advice here for doing that. Chuck, let's start with you.
Yeah. So to me, this is a really good education opportunity for your organization and for your senior leaders, because you cannot, the organization is looking at you as the CIO, the IT leader, to make recommendations around this, but you need to educate them, because a lot of this stuff, these hybrid approaches, depending on what your threshold is for approvals, and a lot of this stuff is going to boards to get approved. So the education aspect of what you're trying to do needs to be with that, and you need to have other partners with you. And so we talked about the CFO, right? Got to educate the CFO. They need, certainly your boss, the CEO. You got to have legal and compliance on board here as well, and then working with your CISO as well on this. All these different components need to come together. So it's not just you, presenting to the senior leadership team, your peers. It's more educating them and helping them present with you as to why this should be in the data center, this should be in the cloud, and it's best for the organization. And that's worked quite well here. I've done a lot of education around that. My CISOs have done a lot as well, linking in the cybersecurity aspects of where things should be, which gets everybody's attention, certainly. So really take a team approach to doing this. You're not alone, but again, you're going to have to do a lot of education because some of this stuff is, pretty complex. But that would be my advice.
Perfect. Scott?
To echo what Chuck's talking about, I mean, I would, if you're grappling with the challenges of going to the cloud, don't just jump into the cloud to say we're doing the cloud, because I think you're going to get sideways really quick. And you need to go into it that this is a strategic initiative that's going to better position you to be more flexible, scalable, redundant, what have you. Put the business case behind going to the cloud. But to what Chuck is saying, you've got to have strong governance. I can't say FinOps enough on this call. You've got to have FinOps. And again, it needs to be checks and balances between the engineers that can spin stuff up and people that are monitoring the compute and storage, so that, they're like, hey, did you all do something last night? Because this spiked and what's going on? But, for me, I may regret this in 5 years. I don't think I will, but I mean, we're really trying to get key assets into the cloud to make us more agile. So it's got to be a strategy. It's got to have everybody involved. I mean, some of our journey to the cloud, J2C, is a complete program at Emory. So, I mean, some of the calls that we get on, there's 30, 40, 50, 60 people that are from all different walks of digital and operations that are involved in these decisions and what we're doing. So it will be something that affects, it's not something that's a back of house function. Like, we just moved everything from the data center to the cloud and nobody knew about it. I mean, just the timing and the outage and the move from rehosting stuff from on-prem to the cloud requires coordination with operations. So, be thoughtful and mindful of what you're doing and more importantly, why you're doing it.
Perfect. Brian, we're going to give you the last word.
Sure. I don't think there's anything I can add that Scott and Chuck really, I think they said it very well. I guess I would, to just bring it together, right? Build a framework. That's what you need. It's a framework and a strategy for it. And it's not, you need to treat it just like, right, you've just come into the job. You're going to assess, you're going to develop a 5-year plan or whatever, you assess your operations. You really need to treat the cloud the same way.
Brilliant. Brilliant discussion. Amazing. Thank you guys so much. Regarding continuing education, you could use the final slide in this deck. You'll get an email when the on-demand recording is ready for viewing. If you want to work with us, you can reach out to Nancy Wilcox from our team and go to our website to register for upcoming panels. With that, I want to thank our tremendous panel, Chuck Podesta, Scott Smizer, and Brian Cornell, and HealthLink Advisors for making this event possible, and you for attending. And with that, everybody have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cool.
Take care all.